people, what do you want to achieve? What is the George Floyd Act? What are the tenets of the act? And, what is that all about?
Sure. So, as we all know, last year, George Floyd, who was a native of Houston, was unfortunately murdered by the police. He was murdered using an illegal chokehold. So, what the George Floyd Act intends is to bring about greater police accountability through the elimination of the use of illegal chokeholds. It would restrict qualified immunity, which gives police officers immunity from lawsuits and would call for greater accountability. It would also institute more training as a step towards police being held more accountable and to have to educate themselves on interactions with people of color. And so there's are some of the central tenets of the act. It would strengthen the currently existing Sandra Bland law by once again putting in those restrictions on chokeholds and on qualified immunity. And so we're just trying to put in greater accountability measures because currently what often happens is when acts like this are proposed, police officers unions will use their authority to then lessen those types of measures so they don't have as many accountability measures, which would then give them more power to act negatively towards people of color and for acts that happened to George Floyd and others to continue to persist.
Do you think that justice was served in the George Floyd case?
Not at all. I think that we have to be very clear what happened in that situation. That was a murder.
Yeah, I agree.
Many people, and I had a conversation with someone on another podcast where they had a member of a police officers union who did not want to even call it an illegal chokehold, and I'm like, no, we're gonna call it what it is because
the knee.
Yeah, the knee on his neck. We're going to call it what it is because when you don't call things what they are, it gives people the license and ability to then mishandle and to be untruthful, which then leads them to be able to perpetuate these same negative actions. So what was done to George Floyd was a murder. The fact that the police officers have been charged is a good step, but what we're still waiting to see is are they going to go through a full prosecution? Because as we saw with Breonna Taylor, nothing really happened to the officers in her case. The charge that the officers did get weren't for shooting her. It was for shooting bullets into the apartment next to her. So we continue to see a fundamental problem of devaluation of Black life, not only here in Houston, not only in Texas, not only in the United States, but anti-Blackness and the devaluation of Black people is a worldwide problem. So that's the reason for why it is important that we do hold people accountable and that we do actually see justice being done.
Agreed. Do you think that I feel like that problem of, just occurrences with the police, violence, unnecessary death kind of happens a lot in general. And it happens to all people, I would say. Are you familiar with a Tony Timpa?
Not as familiar.
Okay, so Tony Timpa, just as like a comparative type thing, Tony Timpa was a man who called the police, and he's a white guy, and they came in and they ended up doing that exact same knee on the neck to him for a long time, and he ended up dying. And unfortunately, also, while they were doing that, they were even making fun of him and like being like, "Come on, man, get up," blah 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 blah. What's even crazier is that they were not charged at all. And so I think about the George Floyd thing, and then I think about something like that, and you don't know who Tony Timpa is, which is interesting because I don't think many people do. You'd actually have to go and look about it. And what I'm worried about is that, or maybe being like one-dimensional about it, where it's like, I feel like the police need a lot more training in general. They need more rigorous training. They need to be vetted even a little bit more. And if they have some crazy biases, like Derek Chauvin, I feel like there was something, maybe he was into a white supremacy thing. I'm not really sure. But I'm seeing it all over. Do you think that George Floyd should be the poster child of this?
Well, that's the thing, is that there really isn't a poster child for any of this. This is a systemic problem, meaning that this has been a problem that has not only persisted just last year, but for hundreds of years. So that's the reason for why, even though there are these one-off cases where there are individuals who are Caucasian, other races where this happens, yes, they are similar, but the problem is that this has consistently happened towards Black people for over hundreds of years. And what we also have to be cognizant of the fact is, how did policing start, and how is that relationship between policing and Black people has been for the duration of policing in the United States? Because I always have to remind people that when policing was started, they were the early slave catchers. So they automatically, inherently looked at Black people as being negative, didn't even look at Black people as being human. And that has perpetuated itself over these years, irrespective of training, irrespective of adding people of color to the force, because that culture and that connection and identification of Black people as not being human has been perpetuated throughout this entire time, which is the reason for why you see the calls for defunding the police, abolishing the police, because if we keep giving into this system, but we're not dealing with the root cause that you don't fundamentally find Black people to be equal, that's the reason for why we can't keep saying, oh, train them, because that fundamental issue still is not going to be addressed through training. It has to be addressed with this system has to change, which is the reason why you see those calls. But that's the reason why I think it's important for us to really think of the context, because yes, individual cases are going to matter, but there isn't one poster child. It's just the fact that we keep seeing this happen. And one thing that I really want to point out, especially when it comes to George Floyd and why that particular situation was amplified the way that it was, is because of the fact we already saw a very similar case like that with Eric Garner, who was in New York City, who literally it was related to cigarettes, related to a convenience store. He also said he couldn't breathe, another illegal chokehold being used, video being seen, and calls for police accountability. And there were these thoughts that, oh, we're going to have Obama's 21 century police task force. We're going to have new training. We're going to have new measures of police accountability. And 4 years later, here we are once again with this same issue. So that's the reason why I think you're seeing the amplification that you saw, was because it was so similar, and yet no amount of training seemed to have gone into preventing what we saw in Minneapolis.
So with what you're saying there, would you say that all police, and I'm just going off based on what you said, would you say that all police are inherently racist?
I wouldn't necessarily say that all police are inherently racist. I would say that the police system is inherently racist. So there's a difference between the individual officer, because often, honestly, that's what people are going to always say, is that, oh, that one officer isn't racist, and that can be true. But the system of policing
is
racist.
What does that mean?
What I mean by that is, what are the assumptions inherently that most police officers base their decisions off of? Most of those assumptions are going to be based inherently in racism, because you're going to say, oh, these statistics, the way that we look at who's arrested and things of that nature, that whole system is based in racism, because it's based in, we don't view Black people as being the same. We inherently automatically think Black people are negative. We're looking for Black people before we're looking for anybody else.
The police system is saying that.
Exactly. So that's the reason why there's a difference between the system and individual officers. But there are going to be those officers who do carry out racism and who have racist beliefs, but then you're now giving them a weapon, and you're giving them a system that's already racist that enables them to do what it is that they do.
It is widely known that the tobacco and diet industries lobby governments with scientific propaganda for years until proven guilty in court. The artificial treatment of our water is the next corporate deception.
For example, virtually every nation in Europe has rejected the use of artificial fluoride. International studies since the 40s have repeatedly shown that endocrine and neurological effects increase after repeated consumption, even at the levels accepted by U.S. government.
Epic Water Filters is the most thorough industry-grade filtration system that Houston Ensemble has ever used. They reduce heavy metals upwards of 99.5%, such as lead and mercury, bacteria like E. coli, and poisons like chromium, nitrate, and fluoride.
Join us in our journey to living a toxin-free life and get your Epic Water Filter using discount code Houston Ensemble lowercase one word. That's Houston Ensemble lowercase one word for 20% off your Epic Water Filter.